Lately, with the NFL draft, there's been a lot of talk about teams trading up or trading down in the first round, and there's a lot of arguments for either side. You have the arguments for trading down gives you more resources, more chance to draft. With drafting being so hard recently with a lot of busts, you just want more options, more draft picks to be able to take those shots. Or you say, hey, I want to trade up because have a dude that I know is going to be good, and I don't care about third round pick that's not as valuable as I'd rather go get a sure thing in the first round. There's great arguments on either side, but I'm gonna go for you guys in this video. Let's say there's no true answer, but I think I found a pretty good kind of formula you can follow when you're deciding whether or not you want to trade or whether your team should trade. And in order to go over all of those opportunities, I need to go back through some history before I can tell you guys where I kind of found these ideas of how I want to trade. Some of the hot teams that have been talked about with trades in this draft are the Cardinals, Bears, and Eagles. Three teams who have been talked about really trading, the Cardinals trading down, and then the Bears and Eagles, really there's been talk about either of them trading up or down. And there's a big reason I think that those teams, sorry, are being talked about as trade teams. And I'm gonna get into that in a minute. But before we do that, let's go ahead and get into the history of some of the last couple years about first round trades and kind of how they worked out and which team I think won the trade, whether trading up worked or trading down worked. Now, I'm not going to include 2022 just because those players just got drafted and I don't really want to say what kind of worked out more. And before I go, I need a preface to people are going to say, well, it depends on how you draft, right? But ultimately, I think that kind of goes into the argument. You say, like, a team maybe lost a trade because they didn't draft well with their picks they got. But at the same time, that's the whole reason for trading down is because it's hard to draft. So you want more shots. You want more shots. You want to just have as many picks as possible. So I think that kind of goes into the argument. If your argument is just it depends on how they draft. So, but anyways, let's go ahead and we're going to go into the 2021 draft. We had a couple trades. This is a pretty big first round. This was one of the best draft classes I think we're going to see in a long time. I mean, we had like 12 blue chip dudes all the way from Micah Parsons all the way down at like 12 all the way up to one with Trevor Lawrence. I mean, that was a loaded draft class. But from that class, we had the 49ers traded from 12 to 3. I don't got to spend much time on this. 49ers came out with Trey Lance. Dolphins ended up turning everything into Waddle, Tyreek Hill, and Bradley Chubb. And now that one was an easier one to tell. So obviously we know the Dolphins traded back. They won that one in a landslide. They also ended up trading up with the Eagles. I'm not going to get quite into that one just because it's a lot of pieces. My goal in this is to kind of go over one piece. Like a lot of teams trade picks in the future. Like with the Dolphins, I mean, that one was such a big trade that we know all the details and what it came out to be. But I'm going to try and just include one trade. So if they traded their later pick, I'm just going to go with who that team drafted and kind of view that. For example, another trade that happened in the 2021 draft, the Bears traded from pick 20 to pick 11 with the Giants. The Bears ended up drafting Justin Fields, and then the Giants came out with Kadarius Toney. Then they came out with, I believe it was a third round pick, who they ended up trading to the Broncos. But that third round pick was Jamar Johnson. Then they ended up with Evan Neal in the next draft as a first round pick, and then Daniel Bellinger in the next draft as a later round pick. So it's Justin Fields versus Kadarius Toney, Jamar Johnson, Evan Neal, and Daniel Bellinger. I'm giving the nod to trading down in that one. I think that was a great move by the Giants. Even though Kadarius Toney didn't work out. This is what I'm saying. This is why you want more shots. Kadarius Toney didn't work out, but they still ended up getting more picks from that. Let's look at Evan Neal, Daniel Bellinger. I mean, like, just the amount of assets they got is still worth it. And now quarterbacks I get are a little bit of a different conversation, but I'm just going for trades. Another op in the 2021 draft, the Eagles trade from 12 to 10 with the Dallas Cowboys to get Devontae Smith. Cowboys trade back and get Micah Parsons and then Chauncey Golston later in the draft. I'm giving the nod to the Cowboys on that one for trading down in that pick. I mean, Devontae Smith is a great player, and I mean, like, as an Eagles fan, I would definitely do that trade over again if I'm the Eagles. But I mean, if you look at the Cowboys, you get just as good, if not. Let's be honest, Micah Parsons is a better player than Devontae Smith. You get a better player at a probably more valuable position too in Micah Parsons. Plus, you get that extra asset of Chauncey Golston, who, I mean, even if he doesn't work out, that's still a good asset as a third round pick that they spent on him. So I'm giving that's 3 trades so far in the 2021 first round, and all 3 of them, I think the team that traded down ended up with the better haul. The last trade from that draft in the first round was the Jets trading from 23 up to 14 with the Minnesota Vikings. The Jets trade up for Elijah Vera Tucker, and then they also got a pick that ended up being Tyree Gillespie, who they traded to the Raiders. later in the round. The Vikings trade back, get Christian Darrisaw, Kellen Mond, and Wyatt Davis. I mean, that one's another one where, like, I mean, Christian Darrisaw and Elijah Vera Tucker are very similar players, I think, at the stage they're at right now, where you can't really, Darrisaw, it might even slightly give the nod because a more valuable position at tackle over guard versus Vera Tucker. But then you also get Kellen Mond and Wyatt Davis. I mean, that's a trade down win for the Minnesota Vikings. They got a great haul from that. Moving on to 2020 trades. 2020 was an interesting year because we had a lot of movement. 2021 had a lot of movement in the top 20. 2020 had a lot of movement in the back end of the first round. So the Packers traded up from 30 to 26 with the Miami Dolphins. Packers got Jordan Love. Dolphins got Noah Igbenogany and Bryce Hopkins. I'm going to give the nod to the trade up. I mean, Noah Igbenogany and Bryce Hopkins never really turned anything. Jordan Love, I mean, worst case scenario, he's valuable like day 2 pick trade at least right now. Could be still a good start for the Packers. He finally gets a shot to shine this year. We'll see how it goes. But I'm still giving the nod to trading up. I think the Packers, that was my first one. They did a great job trading up. San Francisco traded up from 31 to 25 with Minnesota. They grabbed Brandon Ayuk, and Minnesota trades down and grabs Jeff Gladney, DJ Wanham, and KJ Osborne. This one, I'm giving the nod to up again. I mean, Ayuk, I'd take over any of those. I do, like, as much as I give the nod to trade up, I still think, like, Minnesota, like, Jeff Gladney, I thought he was going to be really good. He ends up having a lot of issues and stuff. It never works out. But, I mean, DJ Wanham has no return in. KJ Osborne's a good asset. So, it's not an awful trade, but I'd still give the nod to San Francisco in that trade. Chargers trade from 37 to 23 in that draft with New England. Chargers went up and grabbed Kenneth Murray. The Patriots traded down and grabbed Kyle Duggar and Justin Madubuike. I'm giving the nod to the Patriots. That's another win for the trade down teams. You can see Kyle Duggar, great player, probably better player, just 1-for-1 than Kenneth Murray, and another reason why you don't know how the trades are going to work out, so you just want as many assets as you can. Tampa trades up 1 pick from 14 to 13 with San Fran. Tampa gets Tristan Wirfs. San Fran gets Kinlaw, and that was also the DJ Wanham. So I know I have DJ Wanham in here twice, but that pick was traded a lot. So it was just a weird pick. But anyways, nonetheless, I'm giving that one to Tampa. Tristan Wirfs is just a way better player than Kinlaw right now. So I'm giving the nod to trade up. So in 2020, we had a lot of trade ups win. I had 3 out of the 4 trades. I thought the team who was trading up ended up getting the better. But most of them were either you had a 1 pick from 14 to 13, or they're all in the 20s, so later round picks. So keep that in mind as we keep going into the 2019 class. Now, a lot of the trade up wins were not top 20 picks. 2019, we'll start getting through these. Steelers traded up from the pick 20 to pick 10 with the Denver Broncos. Steelers ended up with Devin Bush. Broncos ended up with Noah Fant, Drew Sample, and Lloyd Cushenberry. I'm giving the nod to the Broncos. I mean, Devin Bush and Noah Fant, neither one of them turned out to be what they wanted, but I mean, the Broncos just got more assets, and Devin Bush hasn't necessarily been the linebacker we really thought he could be. So I'm giving the nod to the Broncos trade down in that situation. The Green Bay Packers also traded, another common team in this, trade up from pick 30 to pick 21 with the Seahawks. The Packers got Darnell Savage. And then the Seahawks, this one got ugly. I mean, I tried following where these picks went, but I mean, this one, so the Seahawks got pick 30, which they ended up then trading to the Panthers, and it got ugly. All I tried to see where all the picks went. It got ugly. I know the Seahawks ended up with Marquise Blair, Ogochukwu Amadi, Ben Burr-Kirven, and then 2 fourths that ended up getting traded again. So they just got a whole lot of nothing, basically. So I'm going to give a slight nod to the Packers for Darnell Savage, even though Darnell Savage hasn't lived up to the expectations. I mean, I couldn't see a single piece that the Seahawks got from that trade that was worth it. So I'm giving the nod to trading up. The Eagles, another common trade up team to keep in mind when we're talking about the 2023 draft. Eagles have traded up two of the last 4 years in the first round. So the Eagles traded up from 25 to 2020 to 22 with the Ravens. Eagles got Dillard. Ravens traded back and got Marquise Brown, Iman Marshall, and Trace McSorley. I'm giving the nod to the Ravens. Great trade down. Dillard never turned out to be the player we thought. Marquise Brown ended up being a first-round pick trade down the line, so great value. Nod to the trade down. Commanders traded from 46 to 26 with the Colts. Commanders traded up to get Montez Sweat. Colts traded down and got Michael Pittman in the next draft, and then Greedy Williams, who ended up going to the Browns, but their pick was Greedy Williams. I'm giving the nod to the Colts trade down. Like, imagine they just didn't trade that next pick because we're just looking at as one trade. I mean, Greedy Williams and Michael Pittman is, I think, more worth package than just Montez Sweat. That one's close though, because Montez Sweat is a good player, but still hasn't lived with that quite that potential, which is part of the thing we're seeing with a lot of these trades. Um, the Giants ended up traded to go up to pick 30 and got DeAndre Baker, and then the Seahawks ended up just trading picks, and that one I just threw as a wipe. I didn't see. I mean, DeAndre Baker ended up getting arrested. It hasn't turned into anything. The Seahawks, I didn't think got anything, so I'm not giving a win there. That was just a wipe. And then the last trade I have in the 2019 NFL draft was the Falcons traded all the way from 45 to 31 with the Los Angeles Rams. The Falcons got Caleb McGarry and Marcus Green. The Rams got Joejuan Williams, who ended up going to the Patriots in a trade, and David Long, the DB, not the linebacker. I'm giving a trade up there. I think Caleb McGarry is probably the best asset out of all of the players there. So I'm going to give a nod to trading up. They traded up to pick 31 there. So you can see I went over the drafts 2019 all the way to 2021, all the first round trades. If we don't count that Giants Seahawks mess of a trade, there ended up being 12 first round trades basically. Like I said, I also didn't count that Dolphins Eagles one. Because I already dealt with that first part of the trade, I didn't want to have like so many moving pieces. There was 12 trades there. 5 of them, the team who traded up ended up winning the trade, in my opinion. 7 of the trade downs ended up winning. So we have 7 and 12 trades. Trading down ended up being the biggest winners, but that's not the case because you're looking like, well, it's kind of 50-50. You don't know. But one of the things that I wanted to make sure you guys noticed, the teams that traded down had more winners, but the teams that traded up, we had 5 teams that traded up. The 5 teams that won trade ups traded for picks 31, picks 21, picks 23, 25, 26, and moved one spot from 14 to 13. None of those are top 20 picks if you don't count the one where they just moved up one spot. So getting that together, I started realizing, it kind of seems to be like there's a lot of value in trading down in the top 20 because teams just value those picks more and those more assets. Like I said, there was not a single top 10 pick trade that I think the team that traded up won the trade in these 3 drafts. So kind of where I came from looking at just these trades alone was, hey, if you want to trade down in the top 20. That's where you're going to find a lot of value. But if you want to trade up in the back end of the first, it seems to actually be a really good strategy. A lot of teams that traded up in the back end of the first in the picks 20s and 30s ended up winning the trade. So I think there's kind of seems to be a disconnect in value of late firsts where I think teams can take advantage of the value of late firsts. They're kind of being undervalued by a lot of teams in trades. So you want to be targeting, if you're a team that's picking in that first half of the second round, there's a lot of value in trading back up into the first round and just moving picks in the 20s. There just you don't have to give up a lot. I mean, like you saw a lot of these ones where teams aren't giving up a lot to move around in the 20s, and I think that's where there's a lot of value in trading up in the 20s and down in the top end of the draft. But that's not it, because I think there's another part that a lot of teams trading that I think I kind of saw in with where you want to trade, and that's looking at tiers of players. So as you can see, there's tiers of players in a draft. You have your top tier of blue chips, your next tier of elite, then your next tier, and you just, rather than ranking your players on like a big board, it's better to kind of have tiers and see how players fall out depending on different tiers. And that's where you can find some value in trading, is by trading at the edges of tiers. And basically how I kind of thought about this was, you have your tiers. If you're at the beginning of a tier, there's a lot of value in trading down in that same tier. So like if you're in that tier 1 and say there's 5 players, if you're picking at pick 1, I mean, if you see a tier of 5 players that's all similar, you want to be picking at 5 because you're going to grab extra assets going from 1 to 5. So you want to be picking players at the end of their tiers. And if you're at the beginning of a next tier, that's when you're kind of at that slit. That's why teams like the Bears and the Eagles are very valuable teams right now for trade, is because I think they're personally right on that edge. They're not quite in that second tier of players I have, but they're at the beginning of that third tier. So they either need to trade up into that second tier of players or trade down in that third tier and get extra assets. Now, I'm going to go over my tiers of first round players for you guys in just a minute, but I just want to emphasize that kind of tier wise, and a lot of people use this in fantasy football drafts. If you see, a lot of people are talking about, like, in fantasy football, say we had a tier going into the draft this year of like Stephon Diggs, Jamar Chase, Cooper Kupp, and Justin Jefferson as your kind of four, maybe even Devontae Adams as your like tier one receivers. And the kind of idea was, hey, if you're drafting, you want to maybe draft, if you're kind of drafting at the beginning of that tier, you'd rather maybe get some extra assets, draft at the end of that tier, draft like a Devontae Adams and a good running back, rather than jumping at the beginning and getting a Cooper Kupp and no one else. So, it's kind of that tier wise that a lot of people use in fantasy drafts. I think is the same thing in the NFL draft, and you want to be drafting in tiers. So let me go ahead. We're going to get into my tiers of players and show you why I think like the Bears and Eagles are in a really critical situation of trading up or down in this draft and kind of messing with the tiers in the draft. As you can see here, my first tier of players in this draft is going to be my blue chip players. This is tier 1. Now, I'm not including quarterbacks in these tiers just because quarterbacks position value is just so different than any other position on the field, and it just skews like where they get drafted so much. So there's no quarterbacks in here. This is all just position players. So my blue chip players, I have 3 blue chip dudes in this class: Jalen Carter, Bijan Robinson, and Will Anderson. I think these are your blue chip. They're going to be great. Your tier 1 players. Bijan's a little bit of a question just on position value. But like in terms of just players for their position, these are the 3 dudes I think in this draft class that I'm fairly certain are going to be really good NFL players and that I would be willing to trade up for and that are really worth it in this draft. And that's why you hear a lot of trade up for Jalen Carter and Will Anderson, where you talk about teams like the Bears and the Eagles, and there's these blue chip players that are kind of a smaller tier in this draft class. Depending on the draft class, we have bigger and smaller tiers. Blue chip players are usually small, but we're going to go ahead and get my second tier, which I think is a small tier for this class, which is normally bigger, and I think is a little bit of a weaker draft class. But these are the only 3 blue chip. We're going to go ahead and get my second tier right now of players. These are my tier 2 players in the draft. They are elite upside or skills or both for some of them, but something where you can hang your hat on, where they have this elite trait that can make them like an all-pro dude, hopefully, in the future. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of arguments for some of these players, and this, like, the blue chip is pretty, like, so I don't think there's a lot of arguments on blue chip players. This is where you start to get more argument. But for me, these players are Jackson Smith-Njigba. I just think he has elite skills at the receiver position and just has, like, he's on that skills part where he's just a very good receiver. Devin Witherspoon and Christian Gonzalez are 2 dudes who both, Christian Gonzalez maybe more that elite upside with just his frame and athleticism, and then Witherspoon with the elite skills and his press man skills and just his ability to tackle and do everything that you want in like a press man corner and just a very valuable position. Tyree Wilson is a dude with that elite upside. I mean, just with his size, like, he doesn't have the skills right now, but he has that upside with his size that is something you are willing to take a huge risk on just because his potential is just through the roof. And then Peter Skoronski for me is another dude where he has elite skills. He's just an incredibly good offensive lineman in everything he does. Questions for him are with his size and position, but I mean, kind of my point in putting Skoronski in this tier is that if you look at him as a guard, he has elite skills and upside to be an all-pro guard one day. So you kind of look at, in this tier, you're looking at Skoronski and JSN as kind of position, kind of like your Bijan. Like, they're going to go more depending on position. A slot receiver and a guard are way less valuable than an edge rusher and corners. So like I said, these dudes aren't all like equal. Like, I'm not saying, at pick 3 or 4, I mean, JSN should definitely be in the conversation. I'm not saying these are equal. These are just kind of my tiers of players where I think there's kind of a split between your upside and just solidifying how they could be. So this is my tier 2 of players. Now you can kind of see where we had 3 in the first tier, and then we have our 5 players here. That's 8 players. Now some quarterbacks will go probably 2, but you can kind of see where like the Eagles and Bears are sitting at, where like, if you don't value running back or slot receiver or guard much, which is that kind of argument, you're sitting at this tier where Tyree's going to be gone probably. both of the corners are probably gone. Your Jalen Carter and Will Anderson are most likely gone. So if you are trying to find a high value position, you're kind of out of luck for these teams where you might not be able to get any of these dudes in this tier. And so that's why I'm talking about with the tiers and like the Eagles and Bears. I think you either trade up into this tier and get one of these dudes or one of the blue chip dudes if they start sliding like Jalen Carter might, or you trade back because you don't want to be the first one picking. Where this is where I'm saying, like, if the Bears or Eagles want to take like a Bijan, a Skoronski, or JSN, I think those are the only three value picks at where those two teams are picking in terms of just players. Now you get into the whole position value argument. Just in terms of players, those are the only three dudes, as you can see from my tiers, I think would be good value for those two teams picking there. So now we're going to go ahead and get into my tier 3, and it's a pretty big tier and why I think those teams should be trading down in that situation. So going into tier 3, these are players who have they're either a great athlete, they have great skills, some combination of that where, you know, they have something to hang your hat on, and they're really good players that you want to be taking. And these are your mid-first rounders. We got Paris Johnson, Quentin Johnston, Kalijah Cansey, Lucas Van Ness, Dalton Kincaid, Joey Porter, Deonte Banks, Brian Branch, Nolan Smith, Michael Mayer, and Zay Flowers. There's going to be more argument for these guys still. I know some people that people think should be in here, people that aren't. But this is your kind of territory where these are a lot of the names you see with teams like the Bears and Eagles, where you see, you know, Bears, you're seeing a lot of Paris Johnson. Peter Skoronski is usually here a lot, but if they're looking for a more true tackle, you're looking at, you know, Paris Johnson as one of them. You know, the Eagles, you're hearing a lot of your Lucas Van Ness. You're hearing a lot of Nolan Smith. Those kind of names. Kalijah Cansey, even from people at this range. So these are my dudes where, you know, they're either incredible athletes or incredible skills, but they don't have necessarily both or that upside that I think the twos in tier 2. And this is why you can see here, this is a pretty big tier, you know. We got 11 names here that I think. So this is where if you're a team where I see these players as pretty similar in like just value. So if you're a team like the Bears or Eagles, this is a chance where you either jump in at the beginning or you can trade back, maybe even pick up an extra first or at least some day 2 picks. Get a dude still in this tier. If you trade back to like late teens, you can still get a dude in this tier, a very similar value, but you pick up other picks too. So like, I mean, you can just see with these teams, like if you're the Eagles, would you rather get a Nolan Smith at 10 and if you're like, oh, that's a little bit of reach, or you trade back, grab extra assets and still get a dude like Brian Branch or Deonte Banks where you're getting a very similar talent plus you're getting an extra day 2 or even maybe a next year day 1 pick. And that's just where I see the value in this tier being a big tier. But keep in mind, there's also a pretty big jump from that last year. I think there's a pretty big difference between that tier 2 I showed and this tier 3 in players, and why I think there could be a lot of trades in that, you know, 7 to 15 range. I think could get kind of crazy on draft night. It got crazy last year. You saw all the trade ups for all the receivers last year. I think it could get pretty crazy from 8 to 15 this year's draft class, with this tier being kind of a weaker tier compared to some other draft classes. Now we got my final 4th tier. This is the final tier for the first round kind of players I have. And this is, I don't know, I just labeled it almost there. There's a dude to like, they're almost into those next tiers. There's just kind of one thing about all of these guys. You're Jordan Addison, it's the weight. DeJuan Jones, he's very raw. Addy Thomas, same thing, very raw. Will McDonald, the weight. You know, Miles Murphy hasn't put it together, but the athlete there, you know, these guys are almost there. So you got, you know, Darnell Wright, Brian Receive, Miles Murphy, Broderick Jones, Anton Harrison, Will McDonald, Adetomiwa, Jordan Addison, Tyreek Stevenson, DeJuan Jones, Osiris Torrance, Steve Avila, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Keanu Benton. Like I said, there's going to be argument. And like I said, I don't view these dudes as all the exact same, you know? I don't see Adetomiwa as the exact same value as a dude like Jahmyr Gibbs, who I don't see Jahmyr Gibbs at the same value as Broderick Jones. But I just think there's similar skill sets where if you're a team where your best player available is one of these players, and if you're kind of at the beginning of this tier where like all of these guys are available, this could be a good time to trade back. And this is also the perfect tier of when I was talking about the value of trading up in the back end. this is a great tier of, if one of these dudes is there at the end of the first and your team loves them, this is where you can have great value jumping up in the back of the first round to get one of these dudes, because these dudes, there'll be a couple of them there on day 2. You know, overall, out of all the dudes I've shown you, I think I showed you 33 players. Plus, if you include 4 quarterbacks, probably go in the first round. We're looking at 37 players. So there's probably going to be like 5, maybe 5 of these dudes, maybe probably up to like 8 of these dudes, because there's obviously going to be some other dudes drafted ahead that I don't have in these tiers. So you think there could be a decent amount of these dudes available on day 2, but like if you love one of these 2 dudes, or I think the best value in the draft is that last tier that I showed you guys. If any of those dudes are available there in the late first, that's where you're going to get incredible value trading back up in the first, stealing some of those dudes. And maybe even if some of these dudes are there in the second, you can find great value trading up for these dudes in that tier 3 of, I think these dudes are almost first round worthy. Some of them, you know, like Darnell Wright and Broderick Jones, I think are more definite first rounds. And some of the dudes like Will McDonald, Jahmyr Gibbs, Steve Avila are some of the dudes where maybe first round, but like still dudes that if you draft in the first round, I don't think that's bad value for them in the end for this tier. Anyway, that's going to go ahead and kind of wrap up this video. So if you're kind of confused, basically what you want to take away from this video is that you want to be drafting on the edges of tiers, however you tier the players off. You want to be getting the most value by drafting at end of tiers of players. And the best values we can see in the draft of doing that is trading down in the beginning of the first round. The first half of the first round, you get so much value from trading down. Teams value those picks so much that you want to be trading down. So if you're the Cardinals, Eagles, Bears, trading down is a great option for a lot of those teams, grabbing more assets, future assets. But if you're a team that's in the late 20s or an early second round team, you can find a lot of value in this draft. Trading up into the first round is not a bad idea. So like a lot of people are like, trade down, always trade down, always trade down. That's like a kind of consensus that some people feel right now. That's not true. What we've seen is not true. Trading up in the back end of the first can be a lot of value. And if your team does that, don't be upset, because there's been a lot of value in trading up in that back end of the first lately, and it's a good thing for your team to go ahead and get a dude that they see with that first round value and get him at the back end of the first with that 5th-year option. Has been a great idea year after year for teams. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this little bit of a different video. I just kind of saw the trades, wanted to go over what I thought about the trades. We'll see how many trades happen in the first one. Like I said, I think between like picks 7 and 15, it's going to be crazy. I think there's going to be a lot of trades. I think teams are going to either be jumping up for players that are slipping, or teams like the Bears and Eagles might take advantage of teams thirsty for a quarterback if like Will Levis starts slipping, and grab a lot of value in this draft, especially with a draft class next year where some of these teams might be looking at like Caleb Williams and Drake May and saying, hey, I want to grab assets for next year. Because like if stuff doesn't start working out, like, I mean, Bears fans, listen, you guys got a lot of assets and you love Justin Fields. I love Justin Fields too. But if Justin Fields doesn't work out, I mean, if you can snag like another first round pick this year out of, you know what, if you can snag another first round pick out of trading back, I mean, you have all the ammunition you need to go grab a Caleb Williams if Justin Fields doesn't work out. And that should be a thing that a lot of people look at. Like, would you rather have Paris Johnson at 9, or Bears fans, would you rather trade back, grab an extra first round pick next year, and still get a dude like Broderick Jones or Darnell Wright, a very good tackle, and a first round pick next year that gives you more security, where if Justin Fields doesn't work out, you got everything you need to go get one of those quarterbacks. Or if he does work out, you just have another first round pick next year, which is such a valuable pick. Anyways, that's going to go ahead and do it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Let me know in the comments what you guys thought about this kind of trade analysis I did, and any other videos you want to see before the draft. Thank you guys for watching again, and I'll see you next time.